Yo, what up everyone? How's it going? Kermode here. Welcome to my second video in my drum design series. As you can see, I'm still not in my studio, so again, apologies for the lack of quality, but I wanted to get this video to you guys. Once again, my new track, Whip It, is out, so if you guys want to check it out, it's in the description of this video. Your support helps a lot. It means the world, but without further ado, let's just get right into it. So in this video, we're going to be making drums with a different technique. This is a technique I call frequency band splitting. Now this technique is similar to the last one where we're not actually going to be synthesizing and making our drums. It's more creating new drums through a combination of other drums. So I wouldn't say this is, creating a drum from scratch. This isn't something you would sell in a sample pack, but it is something you can use in your own music. Now for this technique, I find it very useful to have a reference, some sort of drum from a song that you really admire that you want your drum to sound like. This can be kind of tough. It means you have to find a drum in a song that's completely isolated. So this could be a little bit of a challenge. I'm actually going to do that right now. I'm going to go through my library. I'm going to try and find a song with a drum completely isolated that I want to create a drum to sound like for my library. So let's go do that right now. Okay, this is perfect. So in the Mr. Bill song, 5 Fingers Deep, there's a moment where the kick is completely isolated, literally no other moment. So I'm just gonna make sure to be perfectly on point with the beginning of it. And there's a little bit of sound at the end from, the next piece of percussion or noise coming in. But for the most part, that's the kick drum. Now there's also kind of a reduxy sound in it. I don't know whether that was on purpose or that's like another sample layered. So I'm going to keep that in consideration that I may or may not want that, but you can hear it in the really kind of tonal frequencies in the top that there's some sort of reduxy bit reduction type digital distortion going on. So I'm going to consider that. But this is kind of step one. We have something that we can actually reference so we don't kind of get lost and we actually have a target. So now's the fun part. Now we make a drum that we want to sound like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to isolate different bands of this drum and we're going to recreate those bands. So I'm going to change the cutoff here on my multiband dynamics to kind of the range I want to be working with, and I might adjust it as we have it soloed. So let's listen to just the lows of this kick drum. So as we can see, it's a really clean, clipped low end, and then it kind of fades out. It might even be easier to synthesize this than go through my whole library. I know Mr. Bill's a fan of synthesizing drums sometimes, or at least I get that impression from his tutorials and his podcast, but I know he also grabs samples. But what I'm saying is that this is just such a pure tone that we could hypothetically just recreate this with a synthesizer, and I might do it, but I'll kind of show you the technique the way it was intended originally, and then maybe later in this video or in another tutorial I'll show you guys how I would go about synthesizing that. So what we're going to do now is, with that in mind, I'm just going to grab a bunch of kick drums, and you'll notice what I did is I created a new audio track with the same cutoff being soloed. I'm just going to grab a ton of kicks. So, I'm going to go to my results. Maybe I'll grab these behemoth kicks and I'm going to drop them all on this track here. And I'm going for one that to me sounds almost identical in the low end. So you can hear this one's pretty high, pretty quick. So that one's now the top contender, and in fact I'm gonna go with that one. I think that's pretty close. So I'm just gonna delete out the other ones we don't want. So this one might be a little too low or too high. Yeah, it's almost identical in pitch. It's quite close, so that's nice. I find that Mr. Bill's is a little more clipped and a little punchier. So we could push ours a little more, but for now I think that's close enough. That's about kind of the range we want to go for. So that's kind of cool. We got a similar low end. Now I'm going to do something similar. I'm going to pick a mid-range to work with. Okay, now we're going to try and achieve something like that. Now again, one thing to consider, there is sort of that reduxy tone in there. I'm going to kind of opt to not go for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new audio track. I'm going to copy the same mid-range. I didn't change the cutoff, so we're working about that range here. I'm going to drop the kick drums. I'm going to make sure I don't use 77 because I want to be mixing up samples. And actually, if I want to, I could even use a different pack, maybe like some cymatics kick drums, or maybe some of my own kick drums, something to mix it up. So once again, going for that sort of sound there. So far this one's not bad. Didn't hate this one either. I'm going to copy that over. Listen to a reference again so I don't get lost. Notice how it's so easy when you're creating drums to get lost in terms of what sounds good. That's why I always go back to my reference like every few times I hear a drum. I kind of like this one here. It's not 100% there, but it's a lot closer. So let's just hear how these two sound together. Not bad. See how these two sound together. I like those two. They sound like they're meant to go together. So I'm actually going to leave those. We're kind of straying a little bit away from the Mr. Bill one here, but that's okay. We're still creating something nice. We're creating something polished. So what I'm going to do is the final step. We're going to listen to just the highs of the Mr. Bill kick. Really short and clicky, minus the reduxy top end, which I'm going to disregard for my kick. So what I'm going to do, same thing. I'm going to copy this effect onto a new track. I'm going to drop a bunch of drums. Maybe we'll do different ones. So we just used mine. We previously used the behemoth ones. Let's grab some cymatics ones here. And let's listen to the top end of this drum again. Really short, really clicky. Not quite that short and clicky though. These cymatics ones. Oh, there we go. Actually quite like that one right off the bat. Ooh, those all sound really good together. I quite like that. There we go. So what we have now is we have a low, a mid, and a high. And as you can tell, this is a little different, or not a little different. This is similar in concept, but different than the topping and tailing technique. If you guys already checked out that video, where instead of chronologically doing a beginning, middle, and end, we're kind of doing the opposite. We're stacking a cake of frequencies with low frequencies, mid-range frequencies, and high frequencies to create a new drum. And because we used a reference, I kind of know all my layers are going to sound good together. And the nice thing about this is we don't need to worry about phase alignment, because even though we're seeing this and we are seeing the potential for canceling, there isn't actually canceling going on, because this one is only the low frequencies, this one's only the mid frequencies, this one's only the highs. So the chance of, you know, major cancellation going on is highly unlikely. Now the only thing about this, however, is because each of these are at 0, we're very likely clipping. Yeah, we're pushing into the red here. So I kind of mentioned in the last video I would show you guys a brief demonstration of the sort of processing I would do from here before I export this into my library. So what I would do is I would group these. And the very first thing I would do is not grab my limiter, it's actually grab Ableton's saturator. But I'm going to use it as a limiter. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to soft clip this. So soft clipping is a way of distorting things by essentially creating a limit as to how high a waveform can peak, and if you go over it, it essentially kind of clips off the volume. And what that would do is, if you were hard clipping something, if you had a sine wave, the more you clip it, it's going to compress and squish that waveform into a square. So you're A, saving headroom, and B, adding harmonics. So for me, it's kind of a win-win situation. So in this case, if soft clip isn't on, or if the saturator isn't even on, you can see we're pushing into the red. We're peaking 5 decibels. But if we turn this on, we soft clip our sound. Now we're peaking essentially at -1 decibel. So we just saved 6 decibels of headroom just from clipping, and it sounds barely any different. Maybe it got a little more squarey because we added those squared off harmonics into it, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially because the Mr. Bill reference we were talking about, we even saw that it had square wave harmonics in it. So hypothetically, we could clip this if we want to. We could even clip it further, see what happens when we drive it more and more. Yeah, see, too far, you can really hear the tone. We don't want that. This isn't hard style. So I'm just going to do a nice clean cut right there. Now, what sort of additional things do I do? Well, sometimes I like to try drum bus. Now, drum bus also does its own kind of drive and distortion. So I have to be a little weary because we're coming into this real hot. There's a lot of volume going into this. So I may need to trim it before we hit the drum bus, but let's test it out. So if we do a little bit of trim before, it's not bad. And then what I like to do is, play with the transient knob. Personally, if it wasn't so tonal, I'd really like the sound of that. Maybe let's try clipping or trimming it a little more. That's a tough call. It could go either way. I like the sound of it both ways. So I might even export 2 different versions of this kick drum into my library. And additionally, what I might try doing is EQing. Trying and playing with the frequencies, although I quite like it. And then lastly, I might try like a different transient designer if drum bus doesn't work. So it could really go any other way, and I might spend like 15-20 minutes finessing a drum after I get the 3 different layers. But this is my frequency band dependent drum design technique. I don't really have a good name for it, so maybe by the time I pick the title for this video, I will have picked something more specific. But there we go. Those 2 videos are ways you can create drums through sample manipulation. If you guys like this, let me know in the description of the video, and I might come back with more videos, maybe on how to actually synthesize drums. I know I mentioned I might do it in this video, but I didn't. Maybe so how I synthesize drums, more ways of processing drums, creating 808s, all those things. So let me know in the description of the video if you guys enjoy this kind of drum-based tutorial. And once again, my new track Whip It is out now. So if you guys want to support that, I'll leave that in the description of this video. And thanks again. My name is Kermode, and I'll be back in the next video. Peace.